Hey, what's up? Just want to thank you guys for watching our channel. Please hit that subscribe button.
Before we get to Rich, I want to discuss a few teams in the NBA that I'm intrigued by, that we haven't necessarily spent a ton of time on. One of we've talked about because of their offseason signings. Those three teams are the Memphis Grizzlies and the New Orleans Pelicans and the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference. I want to start in the West because I think it's pretty much unanimous amongst NBA analysts and people that talk about the NBA on Twitter and people that have podcasts and people that talk about the NBA on TV that there are 12 potentially really good teams. I think you can whittle that down probably to 10 or 11 really good teams in the Western Conference. Regardless, the West is going to be a monster.
Yeah.
And Kevin Pelton from ESPN had his yearly win predictions that he released not too long ago. And I went on a long rant this week on the Old Man and the Three Things about that model that Kevin Pelton uses and why we need to take that with a grain of salt. I won't get into that right now, but Memphis, his model predicted, I should say, would have the most regular season wins in the Western Conference. And I find that fascinating.
Fascinating.
Ja Morant's going to miss 25 games.
Yep.
Memphis right now on DraftKings Sportsbook at plus 1,300. They've got the seventh best odds to win the Western Conference at plus 1,300. I think about the regular season. I think the impact of missing Ja is important. The impact of your guy, Tyus Jones, going to Washington is important. I don't know that they're going to have a stellar regular season. I do know they're going to be a monster come playoff time.
Do you think the big question, Ja aside with them, is how Marcus Smart fits into this system and whether the obvious intangibles that he brought to the table in Boston were possibly unique to Boston? Is that something that can translate into another situation in another system?
I do, because I think Marcus kind of understands who he is as a player and where his impact is most felt. And it's not just the defensive impact.
Yeah.
It's the personality. It's the competitive edge. And I've told this story many times, but I just remember being in the bubble. And, you know, you're staying at all different hotels, and the hotels are based on record, right? So we were out of the playoffs when the bubble started, and so we stayed in the worst hotel. But you visit other hotels for dinner. The conference center where they had set up all the basketball courts for practice, the sort of the temporary courts for practice. You're passing teams, you know. You're walking by teams. You're interacting with teams, right? And so I didn't see the Miami Heat a lot, but oftentimes they would practice around the same time or have shoot around the same time that we did. And I remember saying to myself, wow, the Miami Heat, they walk around with fuck you written on their forehead. Like they were there in a serious manner.
Yeah.
And honestly, the only other team that I really felt that about was the Memphis Grizzlies. I was like, damn, Taylor Jenkins, like he is serious.
Has them locked in.
Yeah. He is serious. And so I think Marcus, like he fits into this culture that they built here where there's accountability, right? There's a competitive edge night to night that you have to play with to fit into this Memphis Grizzlies team. And, you know, they lose Dillon Brooks, and we've done enough segments on Dillon Brooks at this point. Everybody knows how much of a fan I am of Dillon. Like Marcus, in some ways, like kind of fills that void that you lose when you lose Dillon Brooks.
Yeah. The other guy who I feel like has a chip on his shoulder who is going to fit in, who's not to, judge too much in preseason, but has looked really good, is D Rose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just he's like a guy that I think there's a part of him that's like people thought I've done.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think D Rose, depending on, the rotations and the lineups to start the season, I think D Rose ultimately could be a really good backup to Ja Morant for this team. I don't know how much you can play like Derek and Ja together just because of the shooting and the spacing issues.
Yeah.
But he's going to provide a lift. And then the guy that I kind of thought he had a great like last 20, 30 games of the regular season is Jaren Jackson Jr., who I would say was a little disappointing in the World Cup. But offensively, if he takes another leap, and Desmond Bane as well, if he continues to develop his off the bounce game, like you're talking about a really formidable team.
I have a question, and this is going to lead into the Pelicans conversation.
Yeah.
Just looking at the DraftKings odds right now, Memphis is plus 1,300, Dallas is plus 1,200, the Kings are plus 2,500. If you're a Kings fan, person around that team after what they did last year, after how close they got to beating the Warriors in the playoffs last year, they didn't lose anyone. Like you look at that a little bit, that feels a little disrespectful.
Interesting. Disrespectful. I like it. I mean, I like. You could say that.
It'll give motivation, I guess.
Right. They were third in the West last year. They got the 8th best odds on DraftKings. They're a team that's sort of betting on that continuity, right? Electing to use their cap space to re-sign Harrison Barnes to an extension, re-sign Sabonis to an extension. So I think the guy for them that probably has to take a year or two leap is Keegan Murray, right? De'Aaron Fox, Sabonis, we know what these guys are at this point. They're all NBA type players. They're all stars. And so there's got to be a level of internal improvement from Keegan Murray specifically, I think, to get them sort of to the next level where I would consider them like a tier 1 contender. It's funny because in January of last year, I was big on the Grizzlies and I was big on the Pelicans, and of course Zion got hurt. In terms of what I've seen with the Pelicans, you've got a healthy Zion. He's still working his way back. CJ McCollum is healthy. He played with like 3 injuries at the end of last season. They've been running some of that inverted pick and roll with CJ screening for Zion, something that I did when I played with Zion. And it's really effective action because Zion's such a good ball handler. You don't really want to switch that. And then CJ popping into space, either shooting or playing off the bounce. There's a lot of stuff that I like that they're doing in preseason. My concern actually with them, in terms of like big picture, is obviously Zion's health. My concern is like Zion Williamson defensively in a playoff series. And look, I know it's preseason, but some of the just simple efforts, simple rotations, simple closeouts, being in a stance, like I just haven't seen that engagement from him. And I think young players sometimes can get caught up in like, oh, I blocked a couple shots or I got a steal. Like, let's not talk about counting stats. Let's talk about like team defense. And it's interesting because if you look, a lot of times like the Zion Williamson minutes, the Pelicans have defended better than the non-Zion Williamson minutes. But when I think about playoffs, I'm thinking about who are we targeting? And if he's not engaged defensively, that's a concern for me. I think talent-wise, this team, if they're healthy, could still be like a top 4, top 3 team in the regular season and have home court advantage in the first round.
Is that defensive question, would that be the same thing with Valanciunas? Not necessarily an effort thing, but just as a guy that gets targeted with his...
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, yes. But I think with that, it's more like it's a steady diet of heavy drop coverage. And, if you sort of look at the Western Conference, you go through, it's like not ideal against Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, right? Not ideal against Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal and the Phoenix Suns. So I do think the health of Larry Nance for the Pelicans and his ability to, and he was hurt last year. He gets like a pass on last season because he was trying to play through his injury, he got worse. I think his potential versatility in a playoff series to be able to be up and pick and roll, to be able to switch, that's important. But ultimately, like, you need full engagement from these guys. And look, like, they were 6th defensively last year. Herb Jones is a monster. Like, they have, I think, enough talent to be a contender in some capacity. And then the other team I wanted to mention was the Cleveland Cavaliers, because we've got to give the obligatory Cleveland talk on this podcast because Rich Paul.
Have to.
Yeah, we have to. They're at plus 1,000. They have the 4th best odds, which I actually find really interesting that Philly is still at plus 750 and has the 3rd best odds given the uncertainty around James Harden. Miami right behind Cleveland at plus 1,100, and that's followed by the Knicks at plus 1,800 with the 6 best odds. But Cleveland, to me, I said this to like a friend the other day. We were on the golf course talking about the NBA, and he was like, "Oh, how do you think this season's going to go?" And he's like, "What about this team? What about that team?" And I said to him, I said, "Look, Boston's going to be awesome. Milwaukee's going to be awesome. Cleveland, they got bullied in the first round last year against the Knicks. They're going to be awesome in the regular season."
Yeah.
They addressed their needs. They addressed their deficiencies. You would assume Evan Mobley going to get a little bit better. You would assume that Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell pairing going to be a little bit better. I'm really high on them as a regular season team. And the thing I'm going to monitor throughout this season with them is the specific matchups against a healthy Celtics team, a healthy Bucks team. I think matchups against Joel Embiid, matchups against the Knicks, matchups against like the teams that they will have to beat. They're going to run through the fucking Detroit Pistons, the Cleveland Cavaliers, those type of teams. They're going to run through these teams. It's the matchups against those top tier Eastern Conference teams, how they operate in clutch time, the lineups they use in clutch time. That's what for me, like it's the Bucks and Celtics. But the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be awesome this season.
So it felt like in the playoff series last year, the two big flaws were 3-point shooting and defensive rebounding in general, but defensive rebounding in particular. They clearly made additions on 3-point side, so they've made they've done things there to make that better. Do you feel like the rebounding? So is that just
listen, they were a good defensive rebounding team last year. They're really good. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I remember. During that playoff series, I was like, no, this has been a good defensive rebounding team. It was a bad matchup.
Yeah.
It was the best offensive rebounding team in the league. It was Mitchell Robinson. It was Hertenstein. It was Julius Randle, Josh Hart flying in for the
Is it
wing.
Possible some of that was also just like that was those guys' first playoff action? Is there any of that?
Some of that potentially, yeah. I mean, I think that's a real thing when you go through it and you're like, oh, this is what playoff
Garden's
basketball
rocking.
is. Yeah. But anyways, they're a team, I think, as we get further and further along in the regular season and we start collecting data, we start watching film, they're a team that is like a sort of dark horse championship contender because I think they're going to be really, really good.
I like those odds.
Yeah. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code JJ to sign up. New customers can bet just $5 and take home $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JJ. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. Licensee partner Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, Louisiana. 21 and over age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.